The battle for Iraq's second city, the long-awaited operation to try to retake Mosul from so-called Islamic State, has begun. The assault by the Iraqi army and Kurdish forces started in the early morning. Tanks are now advancing on the city.
You can see the fighters just at the top of this berm. They have closed the gap on Islamic State. They're just across the other side. The distance, we're told, is only about 300 metres.
The United Nations says it's extremely concerned about the safety of up to 1.5 million civilians in the area. Also this lunchtime, South Yorkshire police say Ben Needham, the toddler missing for 25 years, is believed to have died in Greece as the result of an accident. The first of 14 of around 100 child refugees are on their way to Britain from the jungle camp in Calais. Remove the blame culture over babies injured at birth and improve the system, say ministers. And the heroes of Rio are to be welcomed home at a victory parade in Manchester.
Here, the campaign's hotting up in the Witney by-election with the former PM and the current PM on the trail. And 1,400 miles in 14 days, Francis Benali completes his fundraising tour of the country.
Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. A major assault has been launched against the city of Mosul, the last remaining stronghold in Iraq of the group that calls itself Islamic State. 30,000 fighters are taking part, with Iraqi soldiers, Kurdish forces and Shiite militias attacking from different directions. The American Defense Secretary Ash Carter called the offensive a decisive moment in the campaign to defeat IS. But the operation could take weeks and only add to the humanitarian crisis caused by wars in Iraq and Syria. We'll have more on that in a moment, but first our correspondent Orla Gearin sent this report from the front line of the battle for Mosul.
We joined columns of Kurdish tanks advancing across the plains, kicking up clouds of dust. Before the sun came up, IS was under attack with artillery and mortar fire.
Today, we're going to fight until we die.
Our morale is high, God willing. We will achieve complete victory over Daesh and the enemies of Iraq. Those who challenge Iraq will have no one to blame but themselves.
That was followed by coalition airstrikes on suspected suicide bombers. If I am killed today, I will die happy, one Kurdish general told us, because I have done something for my people. In a televised address, Iraq's Prime Minister, Haider al-Abadi, said the hour of victory had come. But reports from Mosul say IS is ready and waiting with tunnels, trenches, suicide bombers and probably chemical weapons. You can see the fighters just at the top of this berm. They have closed the gap on Islamic State. They're just across the other side. The distance, we're told, is only about 300 metres. Now, there are a series of villages across there, about 6. The aim of this operation here today is to clear those villages so that the Iraqi army can then pass through this territory and continue on the road to Mosul. There is a bit of a lull in the fighting at the moment, but we have heard artillery and mortar shells being fired this morning. We've had at least 2 coalition airstrikes. They were called in when the fighters here thought they saw suicide bombers approaching in vehicles on the other side. Driving the extremists from Iraq's second largest city could take months and come at a high cost. The United Nations fears the operation could trigger a mass exodus of up to 1 million people and result in the biggest humanitarian crisis in years. Iraq's Prime Minister says only the army and police will enter Mosul. That's a key point in the city, which is mainly Sunni, where many are fearful of the Shiite paramilitary units taking part in the offensive.
That was Orla Guerin reporting there. Well, more than 1 million people still live in Mosul, which was occupied by IS in 2014. After 2 years of living under the group's brutal control, they're now faced with having to choose between staying in the city or escaping the fighting. The Iraqi government has advised families to remain, but one charity said whether they stay or flee, residents of Mosul are faced with an impossible decision. Daniela Ralph reports.
The capture of Mosul in 2014 was a great prize for so-called Islamic State. It showed the world what they could do. It gave them international recognition. It provided them with a strategically important base in Iraq. After seizing Mosul, IS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi went to the city. From here, he declared a caliphate, a state governed by Islamic law, a key goal for IS. So the recapture of Iraq's second biggest city is complex and dangerous, but crucial to the stability of the entire region. It's estimated around 3,000 IS fighters are defending Mosul.
This liberation battle comes after more than 2 years of Daesh oppression in Mosul, during which they committed horrible atrocities, brutalized the people, and asserted the city was one of their twin capitals. ISIL's cruelty and reach has shown that they are not just a threat in Iraq and Syria, but to the region and the entire world.
Many people have already fled from Mosul, but aid agencies now expect hundreds of thousands to leave, and they need help from the international community.
We need more support from them in order to fulfill the basic needs of these people and also to maintain the services in the host community, because the host community also is ran out of resources.
This family fled Mosul in April. Their escape was a terrifying ordeal. But for Ammar, the regime under IS was intolerable. She said, "They left us with nothing. If you didn't have a beard, they would kill you. If you didn't go to mosque, they would kill you. If women didn't cover up, they would kill you." Some early celebrations from Iraqi forces, but the battle for Mosul won't be over quickly. Its recapture is vital in the fight against IS. Daniela Ralph, BBC News.
25 years after he went missing, South Yorkshire police now say that without a doubt, the toddler Ben Needham died in an accident on the Greek island of Kos. They've been searching ground close to where the 21-month-old went missing and say that on Saturday they found an item belonging to Ben in the area, which they've now shown to his family. They say the most probable cause of his disappearance was that he was killed by a large digger clearing the ground. Richard Lister has the latest.
For the past 25 years, the fate of little Ben Needham has remained a mystery. Countless hours of police investigation have yielded little, until now. This team of South Yorkshire detectives is now confident they know what happened to Ben back in July 1991. On Sunday, they completed 3 weeks of excavation work at this spot in the Iraklis area of Kos, after a tip-off that a local man, now dead, might have accidentally run over Ben and concealed his body. Detectives have now confirmed that among the items they recovered was something Ben had with him when he went missing.
My team and I know that machinery, including a large digger, was used to clear an area of land on the 24th of July 1991, behind the farmhouse that was being renovated by the Needhams. It is my professional belief that Ben Needham died as a result of an accident near to the farmhouse here in Iraklis, where he was last seen playing.
Ben's mother, Kerry Needham, has been kept closely informed of the search operation. When the latest investigations began in Kos, she said she accepted that her son was probably dead.
I think so. I think so. I don't think the police would have given us this information if it wasn't what they thought.
The police say they remain committed to the investigation. It's hoped Ben's body could still be found, but this stage of the operation is now over. The answer to the mystery of Ben Needham is a painful one, but it may now at least bring some closure to Ben's family. Richard Lister, BBC News.
Well, we can talk now to the BBC's Tom Ingle, who's been following the police operation in Kos and is now back in the UK. Tom, this does seem to be a decisive moment in the investigation.
Absolutely, Rita. I would say it is hugely significant. Police had targeted two sites. The farmhouse itself, the family were renovating where Ben disappeared from 25 years ago, and a second site, it's about half a mile away, believed to have been worked as a spoil tip by the digger driver who was working back at the farmhouse on the day Ben disappeared. The fact that that object, whatever it is, we don't know what it is yet, has been recovered from the second site means clearly it was transported there somehow, and the implication is Ben went along too. And it's a terribly tragic conclusion to the story for the family.
And the family, as you say, have been searching for Ben, trying to find out what happened to him for a quarter of a century. How are they likely to take this?
Well, absolutely. They have always believed Ben was alive, that he'd possibly been abducted or trafficked or somehow otherwise disappeared on the island of Kos. They've been back time and again, not just to Kos, but to Greece, to Turkey, nearby. They've appeared on television programmes in Greece appealing for information and had many, many leads which have been followed up. But the mood music did change about 3 weeks ago when this new investigation began, with Kerry Needham saying she believed her son was dead. She said a few days ago she wanted now to be able to lay him to rest and remember him as he was. It seems that this part of the story is over and the next part of the story is beginning.
Tom, thank you very much. Tom Ingle there. The government wants to introduce a new compensation scheme for parents in England whose children are injured at birth. The present system, which involves proving fault, can take years before a payment is made. The NHS in England has one of the worst records in the developed world for stillbirths or for babies dying soon after birth. And ministers think that lessons could be learned faster if there were less of a blame culture. Here's a health correspondent, Robert Piggott.
When Michelle Hemington's first son, Louis, was born dead, an inquiry revealed 19 separate failings in the hospital's care. It took her 4 years in court to get compensation.
Losing Louis was the hardest thing we've ever had to go through. You can't describe what it's like to lose a child. It's so important that lessons are learnt, because when you lose a child through hospital failings, medical negligence, you just want it never to happen again.
The number and complexity of births has been increasing, leaving England with the poorest safety record of almost any other developed country. For every 1,000 births in England, more than 7 babies are either born dead or die soon afterwards. Compensation for the death and injury of babies costs the NHS £500 million a year, and families have to wait an average of 11.5 years for legal cases to be resolved.
Welcome party.
The Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, says NHS maternity staff do a fantastic job under huge pressure. But he says the prospect of legal action exacerbates a blame culture when things go wrong. He wants a system of independent investigators to decide when the harm babies suffer could have been avoided. Parents who opted into the scheme would then quickly get compensation.
This is a new system where we're going to give doctors and nurses a safe space to talk openly about what happened without worrying about litigation, give parents an alternative to the courts, and take another step towards our ambition, which is that NHS care should be the safest, highest quality care of anywhere in the world.
Michelle Hemington welcomes the scheme, but says it must ensure that compensation isn't curtailed.
I think the new scheme needs to be open and honest. Parents need to be able to trust the new scheme, which is incredibly important, as they will resort to litigation if they don't feel it's fully independent and has been open and honest.
The Royal College of Midwives said reducing stillbirths was desperately needed, but warned that a shortage of money and staff could undermine the effort to do so. Robert Piggott, BBC News.
A decision on a new runway at Heathrow has been postponed for what's been called a short pause. There had been speculation that a final decision would be made at tomorrow's meeting of the Cabinet. Well, let's speak now to our economics editor, Kamal Ahmed. And Kamal, do we know why?
Well, Rita, I think that Theresa May wants to make sure that there is the fullest discussion possible before she makes what is going to be a controversial decision. Let's not forget, no government has given the go-ahead to a full-length new runway in the southeast of England since the Second World War. So I think another couple of weeks of delay may not be neither here nor there. I think she knows that her cabinet is split. You've got Boris Johnson, the Foreign Secretary, who's very much opposed to Heathrow expansion. You've got Justin Justine Greening, the Education Secretary, very opposed. And on the other side, you have people like Liam Fox, the International Trade Secretary, who backs Heathrow, Sajid Javid, the Communities Minister, who backs Heathrow. She knows she's not going to get consensus on this issue, but she wants to ensure that the Cabinet is allowed to give its view to her before she makes that final decision. Now, I'm told by Whitehall officials that Heathrow is the front runner at the moment. No final decision, but is the front runner at the moment because it's seen as better for the whole of the British economy. It's got in a better geographical position than Gatwick, which is south of London. But the government knows whatever decision it takes, Heathrow or Gatwick, there will be legal challenges ahead on environment, on noise. Theresa May knows, just like Hinkley Nuclear Power Station, this is a very, very controversial decision.
OK, Kamal, thank you. 14 children who've been living in the jungle migrant camp near Calais, most of them from Syria and Afghanistan, are due to arrive here today to join relatives already living in the UK. Dozens more are expected to arrive in the coming weeks before the authorities in France dismantle the jungle. A recent change in the law means the government is now required to relocate unaccompanied refugee children from Europe. Well, let's go now to our correspondent Simon Jones, who's in Calais for us. Simon.
Well, the initial 14 children left the jungle for a new life by minibus early this morning. Word quickly spread here at the camp about what had happened. A lot of people turned up seeking information about whether they could get across the channel. But it was at times pretty chaotic, a sign perhaps of how long and difficult the process is likely to be. Desperate to escape the squalor of the so-called jungle and desperate for information. 14 unaccompanied children are being reunited with their families in the UK today. Many more say they want to follow. Where do you want to go?
I want to go to England.
You want to go to England? Why?
I don't have any family. I have family in England. I want to, in next life, to become a engineer or doctor.
The British government says it will accept children from the jungle if they have close relatives already in the UK. But trying to determine who does and how old people are is proving problematic. The jungle is home to up to 10,000 people, including more than 1,000 children, according to charities. The clock is ticking before its demolition. Aid groups fear children could disappear before they're processed. It's a pretty confused situation here, with a huge number of people who have turned up believing they may be able to register to travel across to the UK. But it's clear that many of the people here will ultimately end up disappointed.
It's been thrown together as a response to all the political calls in the French election. But, I mean, logistical exercise to move 10,000 people and rehouse them, being put together in a matter of weeks, it's really, really concerning.
But Citizens UK, which is helping the government reunite children with their families, says today is a proud moment for Britain with the 14 arrivals. But it says it will not rest until every last child with a right to sanctuary is brought to safety. The remaining children will be processed in France, but it's not clear when and how that will happen. Well, the Home Office has just confirmed in the past few minutes that the 14 children have now arrived in the UK. Their initial destination will be Croydon, where they'll register with the Home Office, and then they're going to be reunited with families in local churches. But these are just 14 children, potentially 300 here in the jungle have the right to cross the channel. The question now, how long is that going to take, and can it happen before the destruction of the jungle?
Simon, thank you. Simon Jones there. The time is 18 minutes past 1, our top story this lunchtime. A major military offensive is underway to retake the Iraqi city of Mosul from so-called Islamic State. And coming up, they almost named her Boaty McBoatface, but work has now begun on the new polar research vessel named after Sir David Attenborough.
In South today at 1:30, the campaign's hotting up in the Witney by-election with the former PM and the current PM on the trail. And 1,400 miles in 14 days, Francis Benali completes his tour of 44 Premier League and Championship clubs.
Now, the heroes of Great Britain's Olympic and Paralympic teams are getting ready for a victory parade in Manchester this afternoon. Up to 200,000 people are expected to line the streets to cheer on around 350 athletes for their success in Rio. Between them, the two teams won a record 214 medals, both of them coming second in the medal tables. Well, let's cross to Manchester, where Jane Hill is on the parade route. Jane.
Hello, Rita. Thank you very much. Welcome to a very sunny Manchester for a day of celebration. That parade starts here at the Museum of Science and Industry just in the next few hours. The first few athletes starting to arrive here. They'll be getting onto 14 floats, which will be led out from here on a 3-mile route, culminating in a very big party, we think, tonight, and a well-deserved one at that. Our sports correspondent Andy Swiss takes a look ahead at a day of celebration.
It was British sport's golden summer, one of astonishing achievement and spectacular success. More than 200 Olympic and Paralympic medals, beating their targets as well as their rivals. And now, after returning from Rio to a hero's welcome, they're getting ready for another.
Wins the gold!
This morning, the medalists were gathering at BBC's Media City, and this afternoon they'll be cheered through the streets of Manchester, a chance once again to bask in the glory.
It's going to be great, and to come here today in Manchester and then London tomorrow to thank the people that supported us through the summer of the Olympics and Paralympics. It's going to be exciting.
We sacrificed a lot of time and a lot of training to win these medals while we're away, and then to come back and see you guys cheering and smiling away it's an honour for us.
I'm really excited and really looking forward to it. It's so great to be back with everyone as one big team and to go out and celebrate what we've achieved.
The 2-mile parade route will take the athletes on 14 floats through the heart of Manchester. And here at the Town Hall, they're busy preparing for the grand finale as the athletes will be greeted onto this stage. Organisers are hoping that both for them and the thousands of fans here, it'll be an unforgettable day. The parade will be headed by a giant model lion, specially designed for the day and decorated in red, white and blue. And it'll be accompanied by dozens of local school children, all looking forward to the chance to see their heroes.
I would like to meet Ellie Simmonds because she won the gold medal and she's a really good swimmer, and she's like one of the top swimmers who wins gold medals all the time.
I would like to meet Jessica Ennis because she's my inspiration.
4 years ago, the athletes paraded after the London Games. Few expected they could better them in Rio, but remarkably they did. And this afternoon, it's a chance once again to celebrate one of British sport's greatest success stories. Andy Swiss, BBC News, Manchester.
And let's talk to Penny Briscoe, who is chef de mission of Paralympics GB. How important is this afternoon for you, Penny? What does it mean to everyone taking part?
Oh, I mean, it's incredibly important. The athletes that I've spoken to here in Manchester today are absolutely delighted to be here for the first of two, really special days of celebration. And I think it works both ways, really. Clearly it's about celebrating success of the athletes, but the athletes are also really, really keen to say thank you to the great British public.
And once you've said thank you and the celebrations are over, someone in your job, you have to really start thinking ahead. How do you build on this remarkable achievement in Rio, which in itself built on London, and sustain that and start looking ahead to Tokyo?
Yeah, I mean, Rio was an incredible Games, 147 medals, 64 golds, surpassed what we did in London. We're in the middle of our debriefs at the moment, so really trying to learn lessons from what worked well in Rio, what didn't work quite so well, so that we can actually build them into our Tokyo planning. We've already been on the ground in Tokyo. Clearly we're looking to retain our world-leading Paralympic status in 4 years' time. So we'll be leaving no stone left unturned once again to ensure that the athletes get the best support possible.
And what's your thoughts about public involvement, public engagement? And we see today, tomorrow, huge mood of celebration. The nation's so proud of what's been achieved, but what does that actually do for for someone with a disability in the UK today, and perhaps encourage them to get involved in sport and encourage a broader change of attitude in the country?
Yeah, I mean, I think the great British public really embraced Paralympic sport in 2012, and that was largely due to the really positive media coverage. And I think those inspirational performances by the athletes really started to open doors. And whether it be in sport or in other walks of life, the fact that opportunities are being created, it's that real can-do attitude. There's so many examples, whether it be Sophie Hahn, who saw Paralympic sprinting for the first time in London and thought, I can have a go at that, and 4 years later she's a Paralympic champion, or Anne Dickens, who was a volunteer in London and is now Paralympic champion in canoeing. So we know that the power of sport has an awful lot of reach in terms of doing good, but we just need to make sure that the momentum is maintained and the reach is throughout society.
Of course. Well, Penny, enjoy today, because today is celebration as well. Thank you very much indeed. Penny Briscoe, Chef de Mission of Paralympics GB. The parade kicks off here from the museum at 4:30, which means there's still time to bag yourself a place on the route, I think, and it all culminates at Albert Square. Rita, back to you.
Many thanks, Jane. Voters in the Oxfordshire constituency of Witney will go to the polls on Thursday to choose their new MP after the resignation of David Cameron. At the last general election, the former Prime Minister won the seat with 60% of the vote. Our political correspondent Ellie Price has been to gauge the mood of voters there.
The Oxfordshire constituency of Witney, gateway to the Cotswolds, a place known for blankets, air bases, and until recently, the Prime Minister.
How are you?
But after 15 years in the job, David Cameron stood down as an MP because he didn't want to be a distraction to Theresa May. But some of his former constituents are slightly annoyed by the distraction of a by-election.
What were your thoughts on David Cameron standing down?
Well, I was disappointed. I thought he had said several times that he wouldn't do that.
I did understand the reason that he did stand down. I think he had to. I don't think he had a choice, to be honest. So yes, it's a shame, because he's been doing a good job.
What are your thoughts on David Cameron standing down?
Don't get me on that subject with David Cameron.
When David Cameron was re-elected here in the general election last year, he actually increased his majority to more than 25,000. So there's no doubt this will be an uphill struggle for any of the other parties trying to overcome that. But despite the challenge, the candidates have been setting out their stalls.
In your bookshop, they're in a similar position or worse.
Delivered home. In the red corner, Councillor Duncan Enright is the Labour candidate. He stood against David Cameron in the general election.
How are the Liberal Democrats doing at the moment?
Very good, actually. Liz Lethman, also a councillor, is standing for the Lib Dems.
It's always nice to have a professional wardrobe dresser when you're the candidate.
Dickie Bird, who served in the British Army for 20 years, is standing for UKIP.
You know my name?
Yes.
Great, that's a very good sign.
His name is Larry Sanders, the Green candidate, and if he seems a bit familiar, it's because his brother was the US presidential hopeful Bernie Sanders. And last but not least, the Conservative Robert Court.
Well, it's a real pleasure to meet you both. I'll let you see you've got your talk.
This weekend, not one, but two Tory Prime Ministers came to help with his campaign. As Theresa May's first electoral test as PM, she won't want to take any chances. But by-elections in safe seats sometimes have a knack of throwing up surprises. Witney goes to the polls on Thursday. Ellie Price, BBC News, Witney.
And you can find a full list of the candidates standing in the Witney by-election on the BBC News website. The Football Association chairman Greg Clark has told a group of MPs investigating alleged corruption in the game that the former England manager Sam Allardyce let them down badly. The 61-year-old was sacked last month after just one match in charge, after he was secretly filmed, apparently giving advice on how to get round player transfer rules. Mr Clark was appearing before the Commons Culture Committee. Now, work has begun on the new £200 million polar research vessel that members of the public had wanted to call Boaty McBoatface. The makers, though, decided to call the ship the RRS Sir David Attenborough in honour of the naturalist and broadcaster. But the people's choice of name won't be forgotten, as our science correspondent Victoria Gill now reports from Birkenhead, where the ship is being built.
They're the coldest, toughest environments on the planet. But at a time of rapid environmental change, research in Antarctica and the Arctic is vital. So in a Birkenhead shipyard, thousands of miles from those icy oceans, a new high-tech polar research vessel is now under construction. The news about this £200 million UK investment in polar science was almost eclipsed by an online vote to name the ship, with the public overwhelmingly opting for the name Boaty McBoatface. But despite that, the vessel will actually be named in honour of possibly Britain's most famous naturalist, the RRS Sir David Attenborough.
It's very humbling, actually, if you have any knowledge of Antarctic exploration or Arctic exploration or the Navy. You can think of some very, very distinguished names that have been carried by ships. And that my name should be among them now is a very humbling realisation, and I'm very flattered and complimented.
3, 2, 1.
Sir David took part in the ceremony today, marking the official start of the ship's construction, pushing a button to lift a 100-ton section of the ship's keel into place. But Boaty McBoatface lives on. This is Boaty. It's a robotic submersible that will be deployed from the deck of the vessel, carrying out underwater investigations in places that would otherwise be inaccessible for scientific research. The ship is scheduled to be ready for her first polar mission in 2019, with room for 60 scientists and support staff.
We have a big project to look at the Southern Ocean, those really wild waters around Antarctica. And there's a really important scientific task there to try and find out what that ocean is doing, what role it plays in our global climate, because we think it stores a huge amount of heat and carbon, and that really affects the climate of the whole globe.
So Sir David Attenborough will begin a whole new chapter exploring our planet's frozen wildernesses. Victoria Gill, BBC News.
Let's take a look at our own weather now. Here's Phil Avery. Phil.
Rita, thanks very much indeed. We'll get to something looking a bit like this a little later in the week, but certainly in the shorter term it's all a bit sunshine and showers. Then things turn chilly. I'll show you why in just a second. Then we get to that sort of acceptable face of autumn with a mist and mellow fruitfulness. But at the moment, as I say, we've had a whole raft of showers urged along by quite a noticeable breeze in many parts of the British Isles, probably at its strongest across some northern areas. But we're not without the chance of seeing a wee bit of sunshine. I think that's the sort of mix we keep going through the rest of the afternoon. Perhaps the best of the sunshine, East Midlands, East Anglia and down to central southern England. That's the best of the temperatures as well, 17, possibly an 18. Further north, 12 or 13 degrees. Those showers tending to migrate back towards western areas to finish off the evening. And then we'll just ramp things up as we bring a weather front in from the Atlantic. That merges the showers to give longer spells of rain. Really quite windy too through western Scotland, maybe parts of Northern Ireland. Relatively mild to the south of that weather feature. Increasingly cool behind it, though. Nothing exceptional for the time of year. But it will be cold enough come the dawn for there to be some snow on the hills of Scotland above about 500, 600 metres or so. Even at lower levels, you'll have a wee touch of frost there, perhaps, and a pretty miserable commute at the western end of the M8. Some of that rain getting into Northern Ireland too, I suspect, for the first part of the day. Then that feature will have worked its way across Wales and the western side of England for the most part. But again, it'll be a wet old commute across parts of the East Midlands, up towards Humberside, coming down towards East Anglia, parts of the southeast, central southern England. But the feature is on the move and will eventually drag its way towards the near continent. Brighter skies following on behind, but a real rattle of showers. And a northern portion of that weather front coming back to haunt later in the day. Northern parts of England will be there throughout, across parts of western Scotland perhaps. Brighter in the northeast of Scotland, Northern Ireland, mixture of sunny spells and showers. Fewer showers in the south and a much fresher feel to the day. That's Monday's temperatures. There Tuesday. You see how they fall away really quite markedly in some areas, a much fresher feel. Taking you out of Tuesday into Wednesday, that weather feature, the low pressure and its attendant front, still a bit of a feature there across East Anglia and the southeast. Quite a noticeable north to north-westerly wind as well. But high pressure just tending to topple in from the western side of the British Isles, calming things down there, but having not got much better than 12, 13 or 14 underneath those clear skies overnight from Wednesday into Thursday and subsequent nights. It really will be quite autumnal, and that we'll have quite a widespread frost for parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland and the western side of the British Isles. More details, of course, right there. Rita.
Thank you, Phil. Now a reminder of our top story this lunchtime. A major military offensive has begun to retake the Iraqi city of Mosul from so-called Islamic State. Well, that's all from us. Now on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.